A hidden video, a slow pit stop, and a wave of anger that shakes McLaren's unity. A fan upload becomes global evidence of sabotage. Piastri silent, Norris under suspicion, Stella caught between loyalty and logic. And as the footage spreads, one question divides the paddock: was it failure or betrayal? The controversy began not with an official statement, but with a phone held above the grandstands. A fan, somewhere between turns 14 and 15, recorded a short clip of McLaren's pit stop, blurry, unstable, almost meaningless in isolation. Yet, as with so many modern scandals, context was replaced by narrative. Within hours, the footage had been edited, filtered, slowed down, and repackaged under a new title. Underscore the hidden truth: McLaren sabotage. Underscore what had been a routine mechanical issue was reborn as conspiracy. The clip spread from TikTok to X, from Instagram to YouTube, collecting millions of views before sunrise. By the time McLaren's engineers arrived at the track on Monday morning, their names were already trending across the world. To the untrained eye, the video seemed compelling. A single frame showed the front left mechanic hesitating before locking the wheel nut. When slowed down to half speed, the hesitation appeared deliberate, almost theatrical. The internet filled the silence with accusation. He looked to his left. He waited too long. He was told to delay. Each comment built on a last and soon. What had started as speculation hardened into certainty. In the digital age, belief travels faster than truth, and McLaren, a team built on evidence and precision, suddenly found itself drowning in noise. Inside the garage, disbelief gave way to unease. The pit crew, men and women who live by fractions of a second, watched the viral clip in silence. They knew the truth. The wheel gun had jammed, a torque limiter triggering automatically to prevent damage to the axle. It had happened before. It would happen again. It was the cost of operating at the razor's edge of mechanical tolerance. But the truth was not cinematic. It had no soundtrack, no slow motion, no scandal. And so the truth was ignored. For the first time since McLaren's renaissance began, its greatest asset, transparency, felt like a liability. Andrea Stella moved quickly. Calm, composed, and precise as always, he gathered the team for a closed-door debrief. The purpose was not to find fault, but to protect morale. "We stand by each other," he told them. "The noise will pass, but integrity does not fade." His words carried weight. Stella's background as an engineer, not a politician, gave him credibility in moments of crisis. Yet even he could sense the fatigue in the room. Mechanics who had once joked freely now avoided eye contact with the cameras. Every movement felt observed, every glance recorded. Formula One had entered a new era, one where the biggest threat to a team's confidence came not from a stopwatch, but from the smartphone. At Woking headquarters, Zach Brown convened a parallel meeting with the communications team. The dilemma was delicate. A denial might fuel the fire. Silence might appear like guilt. In the end, they chose transparency. McLaren released a short, factual statement. The delay experienced during Oscar's pit stop at the Singapore Grand Prix was the result of a mechanical torque lock, it read. No member of our crew acted with intent or negligence. It was brief, almost sterile, designed to end the conversation. But it didn't. Online commentators seized on the phrase "no intent," twisting it into further insinuation. "No intent doesn't mean no bias," one post read. And just like that, clarity became ammunition. For Piastri, the situation was deeply uncomfortable. He had said nothing, done nothing, and yet his silence was now being analyzed like telemetry data. Journalists asked if he trusted the team. Others speculated that his expression in the post-race photos showed disappointment. His professionalism, once praised, was suddenly reframed as suppressed anger. Every word he didn't say was turned into a statement. When asked directly about the rumors, he replied with quiet precision, "I trust my team. I don't believe in nonsense." But even that calm assertion was cut, edited, and circulated online under the caption, "Piastri forced to defend McLaren." He had answered with reason. The world heard resistance. Norris, too, was dragged into the storm. His own pit stop, flawless and fast, became part of the problem. Some claimed it was proof of favoritism. Others accused McLaren of prioritizing the British driver over the Australian. It was an absurd notion. Internally, both sides of the garage shared data, resources, and strategy. Yet the simplicity of the accusation made it powerful. Fans wanted conflict, and so they created it. Norris, who values fairness as fiercely as competition, looked weary in interviews that week. "There's no story here," he said to Sky Sports. "It was just bad luck." But bad luck, it seemed, was not dramatic enough for the world to accept. By midweek, McLaren had shifted from defense to management. Stella ordered an internal review, not to find culprits, but to reassure the crew. Every piece of pit equipment was tested, every sensor recalibrated. When the investigation confirmed what the engineers already knew, that the failure was purely mechanical, the relief was quiet, almost hollow. Facts had won on paper, but the emotional damage lingered. The mechanic in question requested to step back for one race weekend. Stella refused. "You're part of this team," he said. "We don't hide from storms, we outlast them." What made the entire saga remarkable wasn't the rumor itself, but how quickly it transformed the team's internal rhythm. For years, McLaren had rebuilt itself around transparency and trust. Now that trust was being tested not by rivals, but by perception. Stella later admitted, "We can control performance. We can't control interpretation." It was a truth that felt both profound and powerless. When emotion reaches its peak in Formula One, engineers turn to their only refuge, data. Inside McLaren's race operations room at Woking, the lights were dim, the atmosphere clinical, and the silence absolute. 24 screens glowed with telemetry from the Singapore Grand Prix. Every corner, every pit sequence laid bare in numbers and graphs. There were no debates, no opinions, no speculation. Only evidence. If the internet demanded proof, McLaren would produce it, not through statements, but through science. The first order of business was reconstruction. Using footage from their high-speed pit cameras, the engineers replayed Piastri's stop frame by frame. At standard speed, it looked mundane, a hesitation, a reset, and release. At 120 frames per second, the story became clear. At the moment the front left wheel gun engaged, the torque limiter spiked, locking automatically. A digital warning light blinked red on the mechanic's handle. The limiter, built into every pit gun for safety, activates when resistance exceeds a precise threshold, in this case, 45 Newton meters. It is designed to protect the wheel hub, not the driver's position. In that instant, the system had done exactly what it was supposed to. The evidence was incontrovertible. Torque trace graphs showed a perfect alignment with McLaren's expected tolerance. The delay lasted precisely 2.87 seconds before the gun reset and successfully fastened the wheel nut. The entire stop measured 5.21 seconds, long by modern standards, but well within procedural safety margins. Most importantly, identical lock events had occurred 5 times during the season, each one documented, none controversial. But because this one happened under the glare of floodlights and championship tension, it became a story. Andrea Stella watched the playback twice, his expression unchanged. When the sequence ended, he simply nodded. "There's your answer," he said softly. "Now make it visible." His instruction was not to defend, but to educate. McLaren's technical department began preparing a full visual breakdown, slow-motion footage with annotated overlays showing the torque curve, the pressure readings, and the moment of limiter activation. It was an unusual move. No team likes revealing its operational detail, but Stella believed that transparency was now a moral necessity. "The problem isn't what happened," he told the staff. "The problem is that people have stopped believing what they cannot see." In the following days, McLaren's engineers did what they do best. They turned chaos into clarity. Every pit gun in the team's inventory was tested, calibrated, and filmed under controlled conditions. They even recreated the same failure in the Woking simulator, showing how the locking mechanism could appear like hesitation to an external observer. The test footage was shared internally first. Watching it, even the most cynical staffer couldn't help but smile. The mechanic's movements were identical to those in Singapore, a pause, a glance, a reattachment. Not performance. Procedure. What followed was a masterclass in technical communication. McLaren's media and engineering teams collaborated to release a short explainer video through official channels. Narrated in Stella's measured voice, it showed the Singapore pit stop side by side with the controlled simulation. "What looks like indecision," he explained, "is simply how a safety system behaves when under stress." The clip was precise, factual, almost minimalist. No music, no embellishment, just evidence. Within hours, respected journalists and analysts praised the clarity. The sabotage theory began to dissolve under the weight of reality. But for those inside McLaren, vindication was less satisfying than it should have been. They had proven the truth, and yet still had to live with the doubt. The engineers understood something that few outside their world ever grasp. Formula One's perfection is built on fragility. A wheel gun can malfunction. A sensor can overheat. A millimeter can separate success from disaster. They operate in a sport where failure is inevitable, not as a scandal, but as part of the system. To them, a 5-second pit stop was an inconvenience. To the internet, it was a conspiracy. "The world doesn't see our tolerance levels," one senior mechanic said later. "They see a pause and call it intent. But our job isn't to argue. Our job is to be faster next time." Behind the calm professionalism, though, there was an emotional undercurrent. The mechanic at the center of the storm still felt the weight of accusation. Stella and Zach Brown arranged a private meeting with him and the rest of the pit crew. There were no speeches, just quiet words of gratitude. "You didn't fail," Stella told him. "You saved the car. You did your job." It was the kind of reassurance only an engineer could give, based on fact, not sympathy. For a team obsessed with precision, truth itself was the only comfort. By the end of the week, McLaren's investigation was closed. The report concluded that the pit stop had been executed safely and correctly, the delay caused solely by torque lock activation. The findings were shared with the FIA, which confirmed full compliance with pit lane safety procedures. No wrongdoing, no bias, no intent. It should have been the end of the matter. But within McLaren, it became something else, a turning point. A reminder that in a sport where milliseconds decide glory, perception can still outweigh proof. Inside McLaren, the days after Singapore were unlike any the team had experienced in recent memory. The data had cleared them, the FIA had closed the case, and the technical truth was undeniable. Yet the atmosphere within the garage remained subdued, heavy, almost fragile. The crew who had executed that infamous pit stop still moved with the same precision, but the ease, the quiet laughter that usually filled their workspace, had gone. It was replaced by something unfamiliar, hesitation. Not in their hands, but in their hearts. For the pit crew, accusation cut deeper than failure. These were men and women trained to operate under pressure, used to criticism from rivals and scrutiny from engineers. But being accused of betrayal, of sabotaging one of their own drivers, was something none of them had ever prepared for. "We can handle mistakes," one mechanic said quietly. "You fix them, you move on. But this isn't about what we did. It's about who people think we are." Andrea Stella understood that emotion instinctively. He had been an engineer long enough to know that numbers fix machines, but people need words. So he walked the floor, not as a team principal, but as a colleague. He stopped beside the mechanic from the viral clip, resting a hand on his shoulder. "We work with trust," he said softly. "That's what makes us different. Don't let anyone take that away." It wasn't a speech. It was a reminder that McLaren's identity was built not just on data, but on decency. At the same time, Stella knew that the storm had touched every corner of the team. Oscar Piastri's silence during those turbulent days had been deliberate. He had chosen restraint, aware that any comment, no matter how truthful, could be twisted into something else. But the silence came at a cost. Behind closed doors, he confided in Stella and Zach Brown that he felt stripped of fairness. Not because the team had failed him, but because the world had decided his story for him. "It's strange," he admitted during one debrief. "I trust everyone here. I always have. But when you see millions of people convinced of a lie, it changes something. It makes you feel exposed." For a driver as analytical as Piastri, that exposure was deeply unsettling. He had always prided himself on composure, on letting his performance, not his words, define him. But the internet had no time for restraint. Every photograph of him looking down was labeled disappointment. Every quiet moment was anger. The truth, that he was simply focused, was irrelevant. McLaren's media team shielded him where they could, limiting appearances, vetting interviews, and keeping him off the grid cameras during the following race. It was damage control disguised as calm. But even within that silence, there was something admirable. Piastri never lashed out, never blamed, never hinted at division. He just worked. And for those inside the garage, that professionalism became a quiet form of resistance. Lando Norris faced the opposite challenge. For him, the noise was external, a barrage of commentary suggesting that he was the favored driver, the supposed beneficiary of bias. The accusation angered him not because it questioned his success, but because it insulted the people he trusted most. "They don't know these guys," he told a British reporter, visibly frustrated. "They don't see what happens here. They just see a clip and think they understand." That raw honesty, rare in modern Formula One, earned him quiet respect inside the team. But online, it did little to calm the storm. Fans had chosen their sides, and logic rarely wins against emotion. Behind the scenes, Stella and Zach Brown acted not as executives, but as custodians of culture. They knew that morale was the only thing holding McLaren together. Meetings became smaller, more intimate. The leadership encouraged open conversations, no scripts, no PR filters. Mechanics were told they could speak freely about the incident, even their frustrations. The idea was simple, to turn shame into solidarity. And slowly it worked. The garage, once heavy with silence, began to rediscover its rhythm. Yet the damage had left its mark. The mechanic accused by the viral video was offered a break before the Japanese Grand Prix. He refused. "If I stop now," he said, "it'll look like they were right." That spirit, stubborn, proud, defiant, embodied what McLaren stood for. When he crouched beside Piastri's car during the Suzuka pit stop, the garage held its breath. The tires went on perfectly. 2.2 seconds. The entire team erupted in applause, not because of speed, but because of vindication. A small, human victory in a season dominated by noise. The same weekend, Piastri finished on the podium. When he returned to the garage, the first person he embraced was that same mechanic. It wasn't staged. It wasn't for the cameras. It was a gesture that said everything words could not. In that moment, the idea of sabotage died its quiet death. There had been no betrayal, no malice, only misunderstanding magnified by the age of misinformation. After the race, Stella addressed the team privately. His tone was softer than usual. "Machines can be rebuilt in hours," he said, "but people need time. This week showed me that trust is not just part of what we do, it is who we are." The words hung in the air like an oath.